Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the podcast. I hope everyone is doing okay. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here for a while listening to the show, welcome back. And thanks for joining me again for another episode. So I would encourage you to kick back, relax, and, pull out your drink or your food or whatever. We've got a heavy topic to talk about today. And it's, again, it's one that's kind of been on my mind, and I wanted to do some batch recordings because I have some things coming up. And so this one that's been on my mind, I kind of wanted to definitely get it out there because it's something that I don't think is talked about a lot. And what I want to talk about is when children are caught in the fray of a high conflict narcissistic couple. So when they're highly argumentative, they're constantly getting into it with each other. There's no one that's more distressed than a child who is caught up in the middle of that and has to deal with um, just sort of managing the emotions, managing the stress, or managing the expectation of each narcissistic parent. And it's one of the most stressful places to be in. And I want to spend some time talking about, like, just some of the things that children have to go through that are caught up between two narcissistic parents, and who are wanting to fight each other, but also more importantly than just fighting each other, they want to win the fight against each other at all costs, and that child is stuck in the middle. So the first thing that I'll mention is that a child, that has both parents that are narcissistic, a child very quickly becomes the pawn, especially if their parents separate or go through a divorce. Then the child is seen as something that each of them could use in a power struggle or as a weapon against each other. And so um, and children usually get caught very quickly in the fray, in court matters, and they may be the reason that each party gets into more conflict with each other because the child needs to be with me 100% of the time. No, the child needs to be with me 100% of the time. Well, I want the kid to go to this school and I want the kid to go to that school. And so there's this conflict, there's push-pull, pull conflict over what they want for the children. And whenever a parent doesn't get their way with what they want with a child, then suddenly you're a bad parent or you're mistreating their child. So they very quickly get used as a pawn. A pawn may be also utilized to get money. So in terms of child support or, needs and care and things like that. So if you don't give me, if you don't pay for all these expenses and do all these things, then obviously you don't love your child enough or you don't care. And then that becomes a point of contention where I would then, where the abusive parent would then use that against the other parent later. And so a child very quickly, um, it continuously becomes a pawn. There's always something that needs to happen or is a demand that needs to be met on behalf of that child. And if that demand is not met or that demand is encountered with something else, then it becomes war over that, and the child unfortunately is caught in the middle. The child is, and this is, this constitutes as domestic violence. A lot of people consider don't think of this as domestic violence, but it is. But if a child is put in the middle of a parent's high conflict, or they witness parents sort of arguing and fighting with each other, just sort of witnessing that volatility, that conflict, that is considered to be domestic violence, family violence. Um, and it is something that should ideally stop immediately, because especially if a child is witnessing or is privy to parents fighting to the degree that they're cutting each other down. So if they're name calling, if they are wishing death, or they're making all sorts of volatile threats and things like that, or they're screaming and they're lashing out, throwing up something in someone's face, or weaponizing things against them, that is considered to be violence, domestic violence. And unfortunately, it happens all too much where children of narcissistic parents have to witness parents going at each other and ripping each other to shreds, in conflict, both physical, emotional, verbal conflict. What parents need to remember is that, um, like it or not, you are your child's role model. Your child looks to you for cues and how to behave in relationships. So with other men, other women, or just in general, how to get their needs met. So if you're showing up as entitled, if you are showing up as, cutthroat and cutting someone to the white meat every time you get into conflict, you are their model, right? You are an influence, and they are learning how to do those things from you, whether you like it or not, because children are like sponges and they do absorb that. Even if you don't see it right away, especially in girls, like if you may think that your children are fine, there's no signs or symptoms, but in girls, in psychology, there's this thing called the sleeper effect. And I think, I mentioned this when I was doing a podcast with Dr. Amy Baker, and I was sharing with her what this is. But in girls, it's called the sleeper effect, where you know, girls may appear to be emotionally fine, and it won't show up until later on in their young adult years, or adult years, when they're, dating or going through their own relationships. That's when those symptoms will then show up. Whereas boys, it typically shows up a lot sooner. Not always the case, but a lot of times that is the case. So you may think, oh, I did this and my kids are fine, and they don't need therapy, they don't need, anything, or what I've done, doesn't bother them. It actually does. And neurologically, there's evidence that shows, again, that sort of witnessing or being privy to domestic violence in the home, high conflict, is akin to, it changes the brain chemistry, and it does the same thing to the brain that a soldier going to war and witnessing war does. And so it does have that effect of PTSD and changing your neurobiology, and just sort of witnessing that conflict, and then to a certain degree normalizing conflict if it's something that happens all the time. Children that are caught in the middle of the fray of parents, especially if they're divorcing and there's child custody. Um, they are, forced to choose a parent. And I don't know how it is now. What I will say about divorce court is, especially when I was coming up, one of the things that it wasn't uncommon for a judge or the legal team to do is to, question the child and ask the child about what they would like in terms of their living arrangements, which parent they preferred living with, and about their experiences. And so if you are caught in the fray of two narcissistic parents, what I will say about being put in a position like that as a child, you were damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. So no matter what you say, your parent will, one of them will take offense to it, because they will take that as a measure of worth or a sign of disrespect if you don't show the allegiance to them, or if you paint them in a light that's unfavorable. And so that could lead to conflict with your own parents. I've worked with women, or any men who may have had issues in terms of custody, right? With their parents, and they may have said something, and then they get home, and then their stuff is out on the street, or parents will change locks, or, and kind of lock them out of the house, or they will be the butt of negative conflict. Well, since you want to go live with your dad so much, then X, Y, and Z. And so then this starts a barrage of negative attack towards you. And so that automatically makes you an enemy to one of your parents. If you don't choose them, or if you don't speak about them, one of them favorably, in the most favorable light. And so choosing a parent can be highly stressful. The other thing is, when narcissistic parents divorce, there's oftentimes high conflict in the house in general, in which the child stays, just because there's this constant battle between the two parents. There is typically a trickle down effect, where that battle is inflicted onto the child. And psychology, tells us, according to the APA, especially if children live with their mothers, what research, according to the APA, has shown is that if children live with their mother after going through a divorce, or, especially high conflict, that mothers usually are more apt to punish their children. So there may be a high rate of punishment that correlates with a high rate of stress that mothers are going through. So they're much more likely to lash out, to punish a child. It's also not uncommon, especially if the child physically favors, or has some sort of mannerisms, like the other parent, that they're currently breaking away from, or have these negative feelings towards. It's not uncommon for them to physically lash out or verbally lash out at you more for simply portraying the traits of the other narcissistic parents. And it could just be like, oh, it's not uncommon for me to hear something like that. Oh, I would get disciplined, or my mother would get upset with me, because she would say, "Oh, you look just like your damn daddy," or something to that effect. So hopefully, that sounds clear to you guys. Children that are caught in the web of narcissistic parents are oftentimes used as a pawn to push boundaries, between each parent. So what I mean by that is, if couples have children together, then there may be an expectation that, I need to always have access to you because you have my child. So the child may be used as an excuse for visitation or certain privileges to come by, because my child is over there. Therefore, I always have access to you too, right? Or I always need to know where you live, or I always need to know who you have over there with my child, because my child is over there. And so therefore, I have the right to have access to everything that is happening to your life. The other area where I see boundaries get pushed a lot is visitation. So if a parent wants to really act out, or lash out, or get the other parent back, or really push the envelope to show that they're more in charge, what they'll do in visitation is, they will bring the child back. Like if there's an exchange of visitation, let's just say you get the child for the weekend, and then child goes back to mom's on Mondays. Dad gets child on weekends, and mom gets child on Mondays. Dad may decide that, you know what, I'm not going to bring the child back Sunday night like I'm supposed to, but maybe I'll bring him back Tuesday or Wednesday when the custody exchange was supposed to happen on Sunday, and I'm not going to communicate that or convey that in any way or ask for permission and see if that's okay. I'm not going to check in because I'm their parent and I have the right to make decisions, and I don't care how the other person feels about it. This is my child, and so this is my right. And I don't really like how this person feels like they have the authority to tell me what I can do as far as my child goes, or just in general what I can do. And so they will push the boundaries with custody and visitation. Kidnapping may also happen, and that's quite common too, where people feel like, oh, I don't want you to have the kid, and I don't like the fact that I even have to go through custody. So I'm just going to take the child and I'm going to leave the state, or I'm going to leave the country, even has happened in several cases. So child abduction and things like that, where they're oftentimes taken by a parent that does not want to adhere to the rules of custody. Um, and so kidnapping, child abduction, those are charges that are frequently filed in narcissistic parent cases because people don't want to adhere to the rules, or they don't feel like they should, or they want their child because it's a power move. And they know also too what would hurt or inconvenience the other parent, especially if the other parent has maybe moved on in another relationship or things like that. And so a child they can get moved around and caught up in the fray of being abducted or not brought back home on time according to the custody arrangement, which may mess up things with school or any other activities they have going on. And it also teaches them that, you don't have to abide by rules just because you don't feel like it. Children that are caught up in the fray between narcissistic parents are witness to trash talking and negative narratives. So a lot of times what happens, especially if you're going through court or if couples are just fighting or there's a smear campaign going on, a lot of times parents will speak negatively about the other parent to that child. Your dad is this, or your mom is this, or they've done this, and just sort of, just belittle the other parent or drag the other parent through the mud in front of their other children, and they want to paint that parent negatively, or paint a picture to where that other parent is the villain and that child should hate them, and they should hate them by forming an allegiance with them. So there's a lot of manipulation in attempting to triangulate children in talking about the other parent negatively, and because that parent that's doing that wants to maintain the other hand. They want to maintain the power and control in that relationship, and they want to destroy the relationship that the child has with the other parent. And so by forcing that allegiance and forcing on those negative narratives, that can diminish that child's quality of the relationship with the other parent and how that child sees the other parent. And so it's really mean spirited to do that, to sort of complain and talk about them and drag them through the mud. The other thing is complaints. One thing that's also very common, especially if you're going through divorce, may happen the years after the divorce. Psychology has shown to impact the relationship with custody parents more than anything else, is when narcissistic parents or ex-spouses complain to their children about money. So if there's child support and things like that, that it's involved, and they feel like they're not getting it, or they're not getting enough, or it's not coming on time, What may affect the quality that the child has, especially if it's with a non-custodial parent, this has to pay the child support, what have you, is having to be witness and having to hear that barrage of complaints about child support, or even being made to feel like they are a burden to the custodial parent because, you know, they're, basically taken away from their financial livelihood, or they're being self-sacrificial by being the sole financial provider, or being the majority financial provider. And so children actually been shown to affect the quality of the relationship with a non-custodial parent more than anything else has been, finances or complaints about finances and child custody. So that's a big thing. And if that continues, that could have a long-term detrimental effect. And again, talking about triangulation, that would be a tactic that parents use that can, again, force that allegiance with the primary parent and then disconnect them from the non-custodial parent over finances. Um, and I'm not saying that that's wrong or right, and finances should always be something that's dealt with and approached responsibly when it comes to children. But, when you use that to demean a child's relationship with their parent, there are long-term consequences, in terms of destruction of that relationship. When things become about money and high conflict about money, and the child is sort of used, um, or put in the middle of that, or that's weaponized against them. It also can paint a picture, and I'm not saying again it's right or wrong, but depending on how deep or how elevated the conflict gets, it can definitely make a child that's caught up in the middle of that start to feel like a meal ticket. Like, well, do my parents even love me, or do they just want me here because of the resources that come with me? Like, if there were no resources that came with me, would my parent be so influenced to have me? And then also, too, talking about finances and resources, and one of the things that children may experience, especially if there is a sense that they are a meal ticket, is misappropriation of funds. So if they get child support, they may not, if the child is a recipient of child support, the parent that's financially responsible for delegating that, or sort of spending that money, may not necessarily spend it on their children. They may spend it on their own lifestyle, or, even there's been, I've even worked in cases where they've spent that on the new partner that they're dating, or, vacations and things like that. So there can be a misappropriation of funds there, where money is just, the child can be used for financial gain, but the money is not actually spent on the child. That's what I want to say. When a child is caught in the middle, and I think I spoke about this a little bit before, um, they may experience anger from the custodial parent for being an inconvenience on their life, their livelihood, their lifestyle, their finances, their resources. And so a lot of times when children are sort of, when they experience this anger and animosity from parents for being that inconvenience, um, they experience some severe depression, anxiety, and a whole slew of other, may experience some psychiatric issues, and wanting to disconnect and withdraw, or just not be at home, may even feel suicidal, because their parents have conveyed to them that, you are a hindrance to my life, or you have caused me a great deal of stress. And so there's this blame, and the child can internalize that blame, and it could be a very devastating blow. Um, and they internalize this narrative that, like, I need to do better, or I need to provide my parents with some sort of reward so that I'm not seen as an inconvenience or, anything to their life. So I need to, adjust something about myself so that things can be better. And then so they try to, bend and mold themselves in a way that's very pleasing to their parent, but to no avail because the goalpost is always changing. Nothing you ever do is going to be good enough, because you're always going to be an inconvenience to that parent, unfortunately. When a parent considers a child inconvenient, they will exclude that child from their life. And so what you may start to see, or some of the patterns that you may see from parents that exclude their child from their life, is the parent may have a secret life. So their parents may get married without telling them, or oftentimes you see this a lot where parents get married and they have, you may see them being a step parent to someone else's children, and you're like, how the hell are they gonna be a parent to someone else's kid when they're not even a parent to me? And so, there's that feeling of injustice, or like, that anger, animosity there when it's like you have a whole family or a whole child that you walked away from, to go and play step parent with someone else. So there's this exclusion, there is this unavailability, there is making excuses, of why they can't be there or show up for you, or maybe they may be in and out of your life, or they may even come back into your life when they want something from you. And so you learn very quickly that love is conditional, or likeness is conditional. Like, as long as I can do something for them, or I can provide some sort of resource to them, then they wanna have contact with me. So yeah, so those are just some of the things that I've ran through there. I'm gonna stop it here, and it definitely would help out the podcast a great deal if you like, share, subscribe, leave some positive feedback on iTunes. Of course, you can also leave it on social media and down in the comment box as well. So I appreciate you guys for hanging in there and listening. If there's anything that I didn't mention that maybe you've thought of or that you've experienced, leave it down in the comments. Would love to hear what you guys think. And until next time, you guys take care of yourselves and be well. Bye.